Why do you let him sit there? He smells like the street. That's what they told her. Every time the old man in the military coat came in and took his usual seat by the window. But Lena didn't argue. She just brought him hot soup, warm bread, and quiet dignity. Then one night, her diner caught fire. And by sunrise, nearly 100 Navy officers stood outside not to eat, but to rebuild the place that once fed one of their own. Because kindness has a way of coming home. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The town of Wayford sat quietly along the coast of North Carolina, a place where the sea air carried more stories than the newspaper. The kind of town where folks knew the rhythm of the tides and each other's birthdays without needing a calendar. Fishing boats came in at dawn, seagulls argued over dock scraps, and the post office still closed for lunch. Tourists came in the summer, drew hearts in the sand, took photos of the lighthouse, and promised to come back next year. Most never did. But Wayford stayed the same, and so did the Harbor Light Diner. It sat on the corner of Elm and Tideview, 2 blocks from the docks and 1 step removed from time itself. It had a crooked screen door, a chalkboard menu by the window, and a blue painted sign that had faded from salt and sun. Inside, the floors creaked in all the familiar places. The booths were worn but clean, and if you came more than once, the owner probably knew how you took your coffee. Her name was Lena Hart, 39 years old, short brown hair always pulled back in a tie, hands scarred from hot pans and sharp knives, heart bigger than her bank account. She ran the place by herself, cooked the breakfast, wiped the tables, took the orders, washed the dishes, and somehow always smiled. Lena opened the diner every morning before the sun cleared the sea. Fishermen came first, their boots still damp from the docks. Retired Navy men shuffled in next, nodding to each other without needing words. And by mid-morning, a few sleepy tourists would wander in, squinting at the menu and asking if the biscuits were homemade. They were, always. But no matter who came or went, one thing stayed the same. He did. The old man. He sat in the back left booth, next to the window that looked out on the water, the seat furthest from the door, out of the way, quiet. No one knew his name. He wore the same tattered coat, everyday olive green, military issue, the kind with faded patches and a collar gone soft from wear. His boots were scuffed, his beard uneven, and his eyes, well, they saw too much. Locals called him the man in the coat, or just that homeless vet. Other diners had kicked him out, said he smelled bad, said he scared off customers, said he didn't belong. But Lena never did. Every morning, without fail, she placed a bowl of hot soup and 2 slices of buttered bread on the table in front of him. Sometimes with a slice of apple pudding if she had any left from the day before. He never ordered, never asked. He just nodded once barely. Then he ate, slow and steady, like someone who knew better than to waste a meal. And when he finished, he'd leave without a word, just a soft scrape of the bench and the creak of the door behind him. Lena would clear the bowl, refill the napkin holder, and move on to the next plate. No fuss, no announcement, just a rhythm, like the tide. Sometimes, customers asked about him. Why do you let that man sit in here? Lena. He doesn't pay. She'd wipe her hands on her apron, glance toward the empty booth, and say, because I think there's a reason someone ends up living like that. And if I can make one part of his day easier, I will. Most folks just nodded. Some rolled their eyes. A few never came back. But Lena didn't change. She never asked his name, never asked where he slept. She just kept serving the soup. Year after year, rain or shine, she figured that was enough. There was something sacred about that corner booth. It became a part of the diner, like the mismatched coffee mugs or the old register that stuck on the number 7. The man in the coat belonged there, in his silence, just like the rest of them. One morning, a tourist couple came in shiny sunglasses, pastel polos, camera swinging from the husband's neck. They sat 2 booths over, right near the window. When they spotted the man, the wife leaned in and whispered something. The husband looked over his shoulder and frowned. "Do you serve everyone here?" he asked loudly. Lena didn't miss a beat. She placed a carafe of coffee on their table and replied, "Only the ones who are hungry." That was the end of it. The old man never reacted, just kept eating his soup, bite by bite. One winter, during a bad nor'easter, power went out across town. The streets flooded. The pier cracked under the weight of the waves, but Lena still opened the diner that morning, lit candles, heated soup over a camping stove, served coffee from a percolator. And he was there, drenched, shivering. But there, she handed him a towel and a hot cup of tea. He took both. His hands shook, but he still nodded, same as always. In time, he became part of the place. The way rust belongs on old hinges, the way silence belongs to those who've seen war. No one asked questions anymore. They just accepted that the Harbor Light Diner had one more seat reserved every morning for someone who never spoke, but always returned. And Lena, she never missed a day, not because it was easy, but because it was right. It was a Thursday in late November when it happened. The day had ended like any other. Lena wiped down the counters, swept the floor, turned off the neon sign above the door. She double-checked the stove, or at least, she thought she did. Outside, the sea wind rattled the window panes, sharp and restless. Winter was creeping in, and with it came the kind of nights that made the town of Wayford pull in on itself, curtains drawn, porch lights flickering, radios low. Lena went home exhausted. She locked the door behind her, fed her cat, and fell asleep on the couch with her apron still on. At 2:17 a.m., the fire started. No one saw the first spark, but someone saw the smoke. It was the woman who lived across the street, Miss Donnelly, who always kept her porch light on and never slept through storms. She called 911. By the time the sirens reached the end of Tideview Street, flames were already chewing through the roof. The Harbor Light Diner didn't go quietly. It cracked, hissed, and roared against the night sky, as if it knew it wasn't just a building burning, it was a life, a purpose. Lena arrived barefoot, running across the cold pavement in her pajamas. She watched, frozen, as the firefighters wrestled with hoses, shouting into radios, pulling ladders through smoke. There wasn't much to save. When the sun rose, it found her standing there still, silent. Ash coated her hair, her sleeves, the tips of her fingers. Her face was pale but dry. She didn't cry. She just stared at what was left. The place she had built with her own hands, every dish, every spoon, every stool, every pot was now a shell. Blackened beams, charred tile, smoke still curling from the bones of what used to be home. Someone offered her a chair. She didn't sit. Someone asked if she needed anything. She didn't answer. She stayed there through the sunrise, watching the light crawl over soot-covered bricks. And when they finally taped off the area, she didn't flinch. The insurance adjuster came the next afternoon. He was polite, apologetic, efficient. But facts were facts. Her policy didn't cover electrical faults, didn't cover structural rebuilds, didn't cover hope. Her savings were nearly gone. She hadn't taken a vacation in 9 years, hadn't bought a new coat in 6, and now she had nothing to go back to. For the first time in her life, Lena Hart considered giving up, closing the chapter, leaving Wayford. She sat on the curb across from the ruins of her diner, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup. It was nearly 6:30 a.m., the same hour she'd have been opening the doors. But the door was gone now. She didn't notice the first pair of boots. Not at first, but then came another, and another, and another. By the time she looked up, the street was full of them, rows of dark boots moving in step, cutting through the early morning mist like a tide. They came from the south end of town, marching slowly, quietly, uniforms neat, faces solemn, navy, the kind of presence that made people pause, made time itself hold its breath. They stopped just outside the yellow caution tape. One stepped forward. He was tall, square-shouldered. The silver trim on his dress blues gleamed faintly in the cold light. He held a sealed envelope in one hand. "Miss Hart," he said, voice steady but warm. We're here on behalf of Rear Admiral Edward L. Grant. The words barely made sense. Lena stood slowly, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. The officer offered the letter. Lena took it with both hands. Her fingers trembled as she opened the flap. Inside, a short message typed neatly on navy letterhead, to Miss Lena Hart. I was not the easiest man to feed. You did so anyway. You gave me more than soup. You gave me dignity when I had none. Now it's our turn. Rear Admiral Edward L. Grant, return. Lena blinked. Rear Admiral, the man in the coat. The one who sat quietly at the corner booth, day after day. For years, he had once commanded fleets. He had medals, commendations, a name etched into Navy history. And yet, he'd been sleeping under bridges, eating in silence. Lena's legs nearly gave out. She sat back down on the curb, staring at the letter in her lap. The officer beside her knelt down. I know this is a lot, he said gently, but he asked us to come. He said this place saved his life. Lena whispered, I didn't even know his name. The officer smiled faintly. Neither did most, but he remembered yours. Behind them, the others had begun to move, not in formation now, but with purpose. Some carried toolboxes, others unloaded beams from flatbeds, buckets, tarps, blueprints. Lena stood slowly, eyes wide. What? What are they doing? The officer looked toward the wreckage and replied, rebuilding. With your permission. She stared at the ash, the blackened wood, the scorched countertop barely visible under rubble. And then, back at the men and women in uniform working already, sweating, grunting, laying out lines and measuring tape as the morning sun climbed higher. She didn't speak. She only nodded once. And it began. The boots that once marched into war now moved to restore. For a woman who gave soup without question. For a man who had forgotten who he was until someone reminded him he was still worth feeding. They moved like they'd done this before. And maybe they had not the building of diners, but the building of something out of nothing, of restoring order, of reclaiming what once felt lost. To Lena, it looked like a mission, the way the sailors worked, each one with a role, a rhythm. Some cleared ash with shovels, others framed out new beams. One officer oversaw electrical layouts, while a younger crew reassembled plumbing lines beneath the floor. They hauled in plywood, insulation, stainless steel kitchen pieces, all cataloged, organized, logged, and not a single one of them asked for payment. They just worked, day after day, in rain and cold, under tarps and temporary lights. It became a sight the town of Wayford couldn't look away from. At first, people watched from across the street. They whispered from behind cafe windows. Why are they helping her? What was that old man's name again? Is this even legal? But curiosity soon turned to something else. Respect, because those in uniform never boasted. They never told stories or gave interviews. They just nodded politely, picked up their hammers, and got back to it. 3 days into the rebuild, the diner's old sign, scorched and weather-warped, was recovered from the ash. One of the sailors, a man with salt and pepper hair and sleeves rolled up to the elbows, asked Lena, "Want us to replace this?" She shook her head. "No, I want it right where it used to hang. Let it remind us." He nodded, said nothing more. Hung it just as she asked. The Navy Foundation stepped in on day 5. They didn't make a big announcement. Just a single letter delivered in person by a woman in a dark blue blazer, hair in a tight bun. She handed Lena a folder, smiled, and said, "We believe in investing in gratitude. And people who give without being asked, well, they deserve to be seen." Inside, a full grant, enough to cover every cost: materials, permits, equipment, staff salaries for the first 6 months. Lena's hands shook as she read the fine print. There were no strings attached, no press release, no camera crews, no photo ops, just a handwritten note at the end. "You fed a man when the world forgot him. We won't forget you." Word traveled fast after that. People who hadn't spoken to Lena in years started showing up, asking if they could help paint or clean or bring lunch to the crew. Mrs. Donnelly baked muffins. The high school football team came on a Saturday to haul gravel. Even Mr. Knox, the grumpy landlord who once told Lena homeless folks scare off good customers, stopped by with a box of ceramic tiles and an awkward apology. She didn't say much in return, just nodded and pointed to where the tiles were needed. Some debts don't need words. By the end of week 2, the diner had walls again, windows, a walk-in freezer, a new tile counter with a glass pie case built right into the corner. But somehow, even with all the upgrades, it didn't lose its soul. It still smelled like home, still creaked in the right places, still looked like a place where your name would be remembered. The team hung the old menu board on the wall just beside the door, burn marks and all. Lena stood in front of it for a long while that night, fingers tracing the edge. It wasn't just smoke damage, it was memory, and she didn't want it cleaned away. On the 22nd morning, a small bouquet of wildflowers appeared outside the rebuilt front steps. No note, just a single dog tag draped quietly over the vase. Lena recognized the tag. She didn't say anything, just brought the flowers inside, placed them near the register, and whispered, "I know." 3 weeks after the fire, the Harbor Light Diner reopened. The town turned out in full. Fishermen with salt-stained boots, veterans with stiff backs and eyes that had seen too much, kids who had grown up eating pancakes in booth 3, and tourists who had heard rumors and wanted to see the place for themselves. The bell over the door jingled nonstop. Coffee poured like a river. Biscuits disappeared in minutes, and Lena moved through it all steady, grounded, gracious, taking orders, wiping tables, pouring refills with a smile that came from somewhere deeper than before. But around noon, the crowd hushed because someone had stepped through the doorway. The man in the coat wasn't in his coat anymore. He wore full dress blues, pressed, clean, every button in place, metal shining across his chest like morning light on water. He'd shaved, trimmed his beard, stood straighter than anyone had ever seen him. A hush fell over the room. People moved aside without being asked. Lena stood behind the counter, hand resting on a coffee pot, not quite breathing. He walked forward, stopped just shy of the counter, and then slowly, he removed his cap. "Miss Hart," he said, voice steady, clear. "You didn't know my name, but I knew yours every single morning." Lena's throat tightened. He paused. Then, with quiet reverence, he added, "You saved me. Now it's my turn to make sure this light never goes out again." And with that, Rear Admiral Edward L. Grant bowed his head deep and full, and the diner was silent. Even the coffee stopped bubbling. Even the seagulls outside seemed to hold their breath. Because sometimes, gratitude doesn't need applause. It just needs to be witnessed. After that day, something shifted in Wayford. The Harbor Light Diner wasn't just a place to eat anymore. It became something else, something quieter, deeper, a kind of landmark not for tourists, but for those who understood what it meant to be seen. The first ones to come back were the sailors. They came in 2s and 3s, fresh from morning drills or between assignments. They sat at the counter or in booth 5, the one near the coat rack, and though they didn't say much, their presence said enough. Some had never met Rear Admiral Grant, but they knew his story. They had heard the whispers pass through barracks and base kitchens. "There's a diner down in Wayford where a woman fed a forgotten man until he remembered who he was." Some came because they'd served under him. Others came because they wished they had. And a few came because, deep down, they were carrying something heavy too, and they just needed a place to put it down for a while. Lena welcomed them all the same. She didn't ask for names or stories. She didn't ask who they knew or what they'd done. She poured the coffee, set down the plate, and said, "You're safe here." Over time, the diner began to fill with tokens. A small patch from a Navy flight suit, framed and hung beside the clock. A worn photograph of 6 Marines sitting under a tarp in the rain, left under Lena's register with a note. "They all made it home. He helped us. You helped him." And one day, a folded American flag in a wooden case delivered by a young woman in full uniform who said nothing, only nodded and walked away. People came from other states. Some left challenge coins under their plates. Others just sat quietly at the window booth and stared out at the water, as if waiting for something inside them to settle. And still, Lena never changed. She kept the same apron, used the same pie recipe, kept that chalkboard menu out front, though now it read, "Come in. You are not a burden." Behind the counter, just above the coffee station, she'd hung the old scorched sign, the one that survived the fire. The blackened wood curled slightly at the edges. The letters had faded, but carved across the front in fresh white paint were the words, "The fire took the walls, but it couldn't touch the heart." Lena didn't explain it to anyone. She just let it hang there. One Thursday morning, not long after sunrise, a young recruit walked in. His posture was stiff, still new to the uniform. He held the door open for an older man in a frayed coat, whose steps were slow and uncertain. They sat together near the back. Lena watched from the kitchen window, wiping her hands on a towel. The recruit stood after a moment, approached the counter quietly, almost embarrassed. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "this man, he's not with the Navy. I found him outside the base gate. Looked hungry. I know he's not supposed to be here," but Lena didn't let him finish. She just smiled gently. "I always keep a table open," she said, "right by the window." He hesitated. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I'm sure." She walked back into the kitchen, ladled a bowl of the day's chowder, and sliced 2 thick pieces of fresh sourdough. When she placed the tray in front of the older man, he looked up slowly. His eyes were glassy, tired. But when she smiled, something softened in him. He reached up and adjusted the edge of his coat, and for the first time, Lena saw it. A faded Navy tattoo on his forearm. Just 3 letters USN. She didn't say a word. She just patted the table gently and said, "Eat while it's hot." That day, she served 36 meals, poured at least 50 cups of coffee, and gave away 7 slices of pie. Only 2 were paid for. Lena never kept track. She didn't need to. Because what mattered wasn't what people gave her. It was what they left behind: stories, letters, salutes, and sometimes silence. Rear Admiral Edward L. Grant came back once a month, never announced it, never called ahead. He just walked in, nodded at the regulars, and took his seat near the corner, different from the old booth now, but facing the same window. Lena would bring him black coffee and a bowl of lentil stew. He always paid, and always left a tip: 3 $1 bills folded under a wooden coin. They never talked about the fire, never talked about the war. They just sat sometimes, during the slower hours, and watched the gulls skim low over the harbor. On the 1-year anniversary, the town held a small ceremony. The mayor gave a speech. Local veterans read letters. A brass plaque was placed on the diner's front step. It read, "To those who serve in silence, to those who remember, and to those who feed them anyway." Lena didn't say anything that day. She just stood near the doorway, hands clasped in front of her apron, tears in her eyes but not on her cheeks. That night, she closed the diner a little later than usual, wiped every table, refilled the sugar jars, and as she turned out the last light, she glanced toward the window booth, empty now, except for the soft morning glow waiting just beyond the glass. She paused, then whispered to no one in particular, "I'll keep the light on, as long as someone needs it." And that was enough, because some heroes don't wear uniforms anymore. Some just wear aprons and keep showing up. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.